Hi, welcome back to the channel. It's been a while. I've been working on this video for a couple of months now. Well, everything that led up to the video, not really the video itself, but I'm finally ready to put it all together and put this out for everybody to watch and to comment on and to educate me about once I've done this. So the idea of this video is to pretend like I just bought this Mac. I actually bought it in 2020, so I've had it for 6 years now. But when I first bought it, it had no drives. So I had to start with a bootable installer, install a natively supported macOS, and from there I've gone on and installed newer macOS, Windows, and lately Linux on it. And so that's the idea of this video, is like go back to the beginning, make a bootable installer for High Sierra, start with that, update it to macOS Mojave, update that, or not even update it, really install it side by side, and then also install side by side macOS Sequoia using OpenCore Legacy Patcher. Then Windows 11 with OpenCore Legacy Patcher. I can put a UEFI Windows 11 install on here and boot it natively. And then a couple of Linux distributions. So don't worry about the length of this video. It is a very long video because I do let you look over my shoulder as I go through these different installs and go through some detail. I won't call this a tutorial because I'm not covering everything that can happen, but it'll give you an idea if you're going to install for, say, for example, PopOS Linux or EndeavourOS Linux. It'll give you a pretty good idea of what to expect if you installed it on a 5.1 Mac Pro yourself. I should say this is a 2010 Mac Pro. So let me go through what I just said, but in a little more detail with a little more background information. So if I start this computer with no drives, let's say it comes with no drives and I have to buy a drive for it. How do I get macOS on it in the first place? Well, I'm going to need another Mac computer to make an installer, or I have to acquire an installer somewhere. So in this video, I'm going to use I'm actually using this computer because I didn't have another Intel Mac. What I found out is that it's almost impossible, or at least it was impossible for me to make a USB installer with an M1 Mac. I have an M1 MacBook Pro and I couldn't get it to work. And I couldn't even make the installer the way that we used to with the terminal command on the Apple website. That didn't work either. But what did work was a utility called MIST, macOS Installer Super Tool, that's on GitHub. And with that, I was able to make a High Sierra bootable installer. So you plug that in, start the Mac, and it'll boot out of the installer, and we can install High Sierra on the machine. Now you might ask, why High Sierra? Why not just go to Mojave? High Sierra is the second to last OS that Apple supported on this machine. Mojave is the last. Well, a couple reasons to start with High Sierra. First, if I don't know what boot ROM the machine has, High Sierra will update it to High Sierra's boot ROM as part of the installer process. That's not the final boot ROM. That's not the one we want on this machine, but to install Mojave, we have to have the High Sierra boot ROM on it. So if we don't know, High Sierra is a good safe one to start with. It'll get it up to the High Sierra boot ROM, and then we can download the Mojave installer to get to the final one, which is 144.0.0.0.0. The other reason for High Sierra is it supports the original GPU. So it is the last operating system that supports the original GPU, and because this is the Apple GPU that shipped with the machine, it has the pre-boot display capability that Apple graphics cards have. When we update to Mojave, we're not going to replace or update the High Sierra installation. We're actually going to install Mojave alongside of High Sierra. When we get to the Mojave installer, if we don't have the latest boot ROM, 144.0.0.0.0, then we're going to need to update that, and it'll prompt us to do it as part of the installer. Once we get beyond that, we are going to need to put a metal supported GPU in. macOS Mojave won't install unless the only GPU in the machine is metal supported. Apple didn't choose to support their original GPUs with metal, so for that reason we have this Radeon Pro WX 5100. This one I bought specifically because it is a single slot powered card, and I wanted to try some things with a couple different GPUs. Not that that's really worked out very well, but anyway, this card is kind of the do-it-all card for this Mac. It will obviously run Mojave for the Mojave installer. It's a metal-supported Apple card. It also has hardware acceleration for video coding and decoding all the way up to Sequoia. OpenCore Legacy Patcher does patch the drivers for this Polaris architecture card in, so it works fine in Sequoia. And honestly, this ended up being very helpful when I went to the Linux installations, because the nVidia card gave me all kinds of problems with the Linux installations. So we'll be keeping this, even though this isn't the card that I ultimately want to run. You know, it did get me through all the installations, and if I want to run Sequoia and have graphics drivers and everything, this is the card I'm going to use for that. Once we have High Sierra in, we are also going to look at the boot ROM, the firmware in the machine, and we're going to make sure it's 144.0.0.0.0. Once we know that it is 144.0.0.0.0, then we can do a modification of the boot ROM called EnableGOP. So when we're using these non-Apple GPUs, we won't get any display before the operating system boots and loads the drivers. That means no Apple boot picker, no Apple logo and progress bar when it's starting up. The Apple boot picker does turn out to be pretty important when we get into the Linux installs. So we're going to show you how to install EnableGOP. And since we're putting High Sierra and Mojave side by side, we'll be able to switch between those two with an option boot. Once we have those legacy OSs, so those are the last two OSs that Apple supported this machine with. Once we have that, we have to kind of go rogue and do some hacking, I guess, to add some other ones, although it's a pretty slick process nowadays. So we're going to go to OpenCore Legacy Patcher, and we're going to use OpenCore to spoof a more modern machine so that macOS Sequoia will load on it. Sequoia is last year's macOS operating system. It's only 1 year out. It's still supported by Apple with patches, updates, and things like that. And it's still pretty well supported in software. So if you want to use macOS as a daily driver, Sequoia is a pretty good one to run. And it runs pretty well on this machine. But in order to do that, we'll have to make an installer using OpenCore Legacy Patcher. So while booted up in either High Sierra or Mojave, I tried both operating systems. It works fine in both. You download the OpenCore Legacy Patcher app, make an installer USB for Sequoia. So just like we did with the High Sierra, the OpenCore Legacy Patcher process is pretty slick. It works well, and you get Sequoia running on your machine. macOS is really coming to a screeching halt on these machines. We may get Tahoe, we may not through OpenCore Legacy Patcher. They haven't been able to, make it work yet, but Tahoe is definitely the last macOS that's going to work on an Intel Apple machine. So where do you go from there? Well, I've used Windows on this machine since the beginning. As an engineer and somebody who likes to play games, there's just no getting around Windows. I can do without macOS. As much as I like it and I like Apple's services, I don't need macOS to run DaVinci Resolve or OBS or CAD programs or Office programs or anything I use daily. It all works on Windows. It doesn't all work on macOS. Many specialty engineering programs are only written for Windows, and gaming, it's kind of a crapshoot. Like, maybe a third of the games I have will even run on macOS. There's no getting around Windows for me, and when I say everything works on Windows, I'll be saying that again and again. Windows is the operating system for this machine that just everything works on. macOS isn't it. It hasn't been it for a long time. So we're going to install Windows. Now the problem with Windows is if you install the UEFI version of Windows on here, it tries to write certificates into your boot ROM and it'll corrupt it. And OpenCore protects against that. So we will make a Windows installer and install it using OpenCore. Now one of the things I wanted to do with this video is not have to use another computer. After we make the original High Sierra installer, I don't want to use another computer for any of the other installers. So the way we're going to make a Windows installer is we're going to install Windows as a virtual machine running on Parallels on macOS Sequoia. You can run Parallels on the older versions of macOS like Mojave or High Sierra, but it's not the current version of Parallels, and honestly I didn't even try it. So I got to Sequoia, I ran Parallels, I put the Windows operating system on as a virtual machine in Parallels, and that let me make a Windows installation USB so that I could do a native installation of Windows. Now, I was very pleasantly surprised, number one, how easy it was to use Parallels to get Windows going. And number two, it seems to work pretty well in the little bit that I've used it. Everything in this video is like a native boot installation. This is not a video about virtual machines, and I'm only using the virtual machine here to be able to make the installer to install Windows. But I have to say, it was pretty good. So when we're talking about Windows, the big thing to know about that is that this is not a supported Windows 11 machine. However, a lot of us have been running Windows 11 virtually since the day it was released. I've been using it years. And I just don't understand Microsoft, because they put this restriction or set of restrictions on processor generations, TPM chip, secure boot, this, that, and the other thing, that this machine doesn't meet and will never meet. But yet you just make a quick little hack in the installer and it works fine. And for 5 years that we've had Windows 11, you do the little hacked installer and it works perfectly on this machine. It works better than any other operating system on this machine. Prove me wrong. You can't, because things don't work on macOS and things don't work on Linux, but they all work on Windows. So we set up Windows in the virtual machine, and then we use that to create the installer, and then we use OpenCore to boot into the installer and install Windows on the computer. And one of the things about the Mac Pro in particular with Windows 11 is you don't get some of the drivers you need. The internal Bluetooth and Wi-Fi cards, I have the upgraded 802.11 AC Wi-Fi, but Windows doesn't load those drivers in like it loads most drivers in. I'll show you how to get those drivers. It involves going to the Apple website, finding some boot camp support software that was released for this machine. You download it, you extract it, and you can install the audio drivers, the Bluetooth drivers, and if you use the Apple aluminum optical disk drive, I'll show you how to get the driver for that too. So that'll work in your Windows installation on there. Why do I need this when I have an internal optical drive? I don't know. This sits on the desk and I like it, and it's slot loading and it's thin and it's cool looking. By the way, the Windows drivers video that I have on my page is the second or third most popular video, most watched video on my site. And it always confuses me on why people watch the videos that they do, but that one's been a pretty popular video. So this method is even simpler than that, because this time I actually found the right boot camp support software for this machine, and so it has all the drivers that I need right in there, which is the audio driver, the Bluetooth driver, and the optical driver. So I'll show you how to put those in. Okay, so that's Windows. And then once we have Windows in, I can use the GPU that I really want to use on this computer. And this is an nVidia Quadro RTX 4000. And what I like about this card, what I like it so much, first of all, it's very high performance for the power consumption that it uses. So it has an 8-pin power connector that only needs a double mini 6-pin by 8-pin connector, and it works fine without any pixelless mod or anything like that. It's a fairly low power, low TDP card total. But this one has the Turing architecture video encoders and decoders, the NVENC, NVDEC. It has 2 NVDEC decoders, so when I'm working with H.264 or H.265 video in DaVinci Resolve, I can be working with 2 video streams. Each of them gets its own decoder, and it's much faster than working with an equivalent AMD card. Also with a Turing, NVIDIA was already better than AMD at bitrate per quality metrics, and with Turing they improved it by, I think they said, about 15%. So the Turing NVENC and NVDEC is much better than equivalent age cards from AMD. And so for video editing, this is a great card. For gaming, this is not a gaming card. It doesn't have a big cooler like a gaming card does, but it does great. This is like an RTX 2070 downclocked a little bit to about the performance of an RTX 2060. It's in what I think is kind of the sweet spot for the Mac Pro. So I'm thinking like an RX 5700 or 5700 XT or an RX 6600, something like that. Much higher performance than an RX 580. It's not quite the Radeon 7 in performance, but the thing about this card, you know, it's going to bottleneck the Mac Pro at 1080p gaming. At 1080p gaming, the GPU is not limiting for this system. If you go to higher resolutions like 3440 by 1440, then this card can be limited, but it has DLSS upscaling. So if I want more frame rates, I'll just turn on some DLSS and you're back to the computer being the bottleneck. So I think this is a good fit for the computer. A better card or a higher end card would cost more money, would not necessarily result in better performance in gaming. And like I say, for video editing, the only thing this doesn't have is AV1. It does not have any hardware AV1 capabilities. It also has a really high-speed USB port. I think it's the 10 gigabit per second USB. So I have problems when I have things plugged in there and then I boot with it. But if I'm already booted, I can put a high-speed USB or an external SSD in there, and it works great. It's really fast, really good for that. All right, so where are we? We have macOS High Sierra, we have macOS Mojave, macOS Sequoia. I'm going to install all of those on one disk. And honestly, macOS is not going to be my main operating system on this computer. I do have a MacBook. That's what I'm going to use for my macOS. So I have it on here just to run OpenCore or maybe boot into macOS every once in a while. But it's not going to be my primary operating system. So I'm going to put my High Sierra and Sequoia disk up here. So on all these operating systems, I'm using 2.5-inch SATA 3 SSDs. And you might think, well, why do you put your operating system on SATA SSDs? The machine only has a SATA 2 interface. 250 megabits per second is about the highest speed you can get. You can get so much faster with an NVMe. Why use SATAs? Well, here's my experience. Well, first of all, I have the drives. I didn't have to go buy these drives. But for operating systems, I think SATA 2 is fine. I think that's plenty fast enough. When we upgraded from spinning hard drives to SATA SSDs, that was a real noticeable increase in performance. But that was mainly due to the lower latency of an SSD versus a spinning hard disk. Going from a slower SSD to a faster SSD, I don't really see that it makes much difference. These operating systems, the slowest operating systems booting are macOS. But the Windows and the Linux operating systems, they boot up in seconds from this. And they're not sluggish to run or anything. So I think these do great. Plus, this machine has 6 SATA ports. So might as well use them, right? And then I can use the higher speed options like NVMe or even USB 3.0 drives. I can use those for things that really can use the speed, like game loading or even some of the video work with DaVinci Resolve. You know, things that actually benefit from sequential read and write speed. Operating systems don't. So this is a 150 gigabyte SSD. And what I've done here, I've taken the optical disk tray and I've moved the optical drive to the lower spot in there. And these are both fine to run. These are both fine to put an SSD on. So I'm going to put this SSD in the top spot. And if you're worried about not having a bracket, don't. That cable holds that disk on there just fine. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to come off or anything like that. And then I'm still using the bottom for the optical drive, even though I'm like everybody else, I don't use optical drives much anymore. But if I wanted to, I could put another SSD right there and just put them both on top of the optical drive. By moving the optical drive down into the bottom, it makes a nice little rest for the SSD. So I'll go ahead and put this back in the machine. Okay, both drives are plugged in. Just put that where it belongs. Windows, I have on this drive. So if you're kind of new to the Mac Pro, it comes with, so this is the attic, it has 2 SATA ports there, and it has 4 SATA ports on the main floor. And it comes with these trays that plug the drives right into the back of the board. These were sized for 3.5-inch discs. A 2.5-inch disc doesn't fit it, so you have to buy either a replacement sled or a bracket. And this one has a bracket. And then it looks like that on the other side. And so what you do is you just screw the SSD into the bracket and screw the bracket into the tray. And Finlink and Sabrent both make these. They're about $13 now, I think. They were mostly about $10 when I bought them. And what they do is they put the connector for the 2.5-inch drive right where it would be for a 3.5-inch drive relative to this tray. So you just put it in there, push it straight in there, and it snaps right into the backplane. So let's talk about how you install Windows. Rufus, the reliable USB formatting utility. I don't remember what the S stands for, if it stands for anything. But Rufus. Rufus is a program that makes bootable USB installers. And with Windows specifically, it gives you the opportunity to bypass the checks for processor generation, for TPM chip and things like that. And this is the same installer that I've used for Windows for the last probably 5 years. And you just update it every year. You just download the new ISO and you make the new installer. And you can either do an installation from this or you can do an update from this. So if you're already booted into Windows, you can run the program on this and do an update of your existing Windows installation. And that's what I do every year when they come out with a new version. Running Windows 11 on this machine, you get the updates for security and malicious software removal tool and things like that. It's just the yearly updates that Microsoft doesn't give you. And you have to use Rufus every year to make a new installer, but then you use that to upgrade your Windows, and it works perfectly. Never had a problem with it. So Rufus to make that. Then we get into Linux. Linux has been rough. There's been nothing about Linux that has been, it just works. So one thing that's interesting about Linux is there is a tool that allows you to set up multiple ISOs on a flash drive. It's called Ventoy, and it's on GitHub as well. But you download Ventoy and you use it to set up your flash drive. Then you can put multiple ISOs for installers for, I guess, Windows or Linux. I only used it for Linux, but I've got about 5 or 6 different Linux distributions ISOs on this flash drive. And Ventoy, when you boot into it, you pick the flash drive out of the boot picker, it starts up and you can pick Linux Mint or Endeavor or Pop! OS or Fedora, and you can install any one of them. And so what I've done is I've partitioned this drive. It's a Kingston, it's a 480 gigabyte SSD, and it's partitioned into 3 main parts for 3 different Linux distros. And I did kind of figure out that for doing installs, I wanted to have the AMD card, and actually I did a round of installs with this card in. This HD5770 works for everything but macOS Mojave. I mean, it works for Sequoia because OpenCore Legacy Patcher will run the root patches and patch the driver in for this card. It works for Windows, everything works in Windows, and it works in the Linux. I had problems with installers. Even Pop! OS went to black screen with this card in when installing it. But since I used the Pop! OS with nVidia drivers installer, once it was installed, this card works fine. I had to use either one of the AMD cards to get it installed. So just so you know, keep an AMD card around for Linux installs. And once you get them installed, a lot of times you can get around the nVidia driver issues. And so that kind of brings me to the conclusion of this introduction summary part. Now that I have all these operating systems on the machine, which am I keeping and which am I moving forward? Well, as far as High Sierra and Sequoia, I can see the value for High Sierra. Sequoia, I don't think I'm really going to use it, but it's a 150 gigabyte disk that I don't really have another use for. So I'm going to keep those two on there. Mojave, I didn't see a reason to keep, honestly. Mojave gets me nothing that High Sierra doesn't already get. In my last go round, I just didn't put Mojave back on again. Windows is my mainstay. Most of the things I'm going to do on this machine will probably still be on Windows. I'm a little worried about what the future holds for that. Linux was kind of a nightmare, honestly. So many different problems to work through installing it. But now I think I'm on the downside of that. I've got 2 versions of Linux, Pop and Endeavor, working pretty well. I just found out how to change the performance. There was something holding back the performance of the CPU that was killing gameplay, but now I have the games working halfway decently. I still don't think what I'm getting is turbo boost. What it was doing, it was throttling the CPU about 72%. And that was killing the frame rate in my games. So now it's running at full clock speed, but it's still only using the odd numbered cores. It's not really using the even number cores. It uses them a little bit, but it's not using them in the way Windows does. So still not getting as good a performance on Linux, but I'm getting acceptable performance. I mean, I can play a game and get 60 plus FPS. I can see that the future of this machine is probably going to be Linux. And you know, does the next Windows version break compatibility? Maybe there won't be a backdoor way to get Windows installed or updated. And so, you know, maybe someday Linux will be the best operating system to run on this machine. But as much as it's popular to say Windows is terrible and put videos about how I'm switched to Linux, I'll never use Windows again, Windows is the operating system that works with everything. Hardware, software, whatever it is, it just works in Windows. And I can't say that about any other operating system on this machine. So from here, we'll have it all divided into chapters. I'll show you the installation and some details about each operating system. I hope you enjoy this video, and thanks for watching. As the machine boots up, it'll bring up the OpenCore boot picker by default. And it's on Sequoia right now. I'm going to hit a left arrow to get it off of Sequoia and back on Sequoia, because it will automatically boot into the default operating system in 5 seconds. That can be changed in the OpenCore app, but it defaults to 5 seconds. But if you use an arrow key to move it around, or if you use the mouse to pick one of the other operating systems like this, then it'll stop the 5-second timer and let you have some time in here. So let's look what we have here. We have first 3 versions of Linux. We have Pop, Fedora, and Endeavor. Then we have Windows. This is Windows 11, High Sierra, and Sequoia. I can boot into any of these from this screen except for High Sierra. If I try to boot High Sierra, it'll show me the prohibited symbol because OpenCore is spoofing a newer machine that Sequoia will support, but then High Sierra wouldn't support that machine. So to get to High Sierra, I actually have to reboot, hold the Option key, and do it in the Apple boot picker. I'll show you that. But before I do that, I want to show you some more things on the OpenCore boot picker. I'm going to push the spacebar, and that shows all of the hidden icons that you can use in OpenCore. So going over to the left here, we have our Linux versions, Pop OS. We have 2 versions of Pop OS, the old kernel and the current kernel, and some different versions of Fedora, although they're separated. We have them here. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 options of Endeavor. Now some of these look the same. You can't see the whole description, so I can just hover over one, and then it'll start scrolling and you can see the rest of it. So this is a resource image. Let's go over to the macOS. We only have 1 Windows ever, but let's look at High Sierra. So we have High Sierra itself, and then we have the recovery for High Sierra. Again, like we said on the other screen, it won't boot into this from here. I have to go to the Apple boot picker. And then here's Sequoia, and then the recovery for Sequoia. Now I do have a problem, especially with doing these Linux installs, that the Sequoia installation gets corrupted. And it turns into actually this symbol, this High Sierra symbol, and it'll say Sequoia-data, and then it won't work. I fixed that by going into recovery and using that to reinstall macOS. And then it brings everything back just like it was before. It'll have all my apps, all my files, even the passwords in the browsers and things like that are all saved as if nothing happened. But unfortunately, it takes an hour or so to do that. So that's how you recover Sequoia. And if I keep going here, there's another couple tools. There's this boot kicker, which I don't really understand very well. OpenShell, which I don't understand either. And this is a big one, reset NVRAM. So you have a key combination with, I think it's something like Control-Alt-PR or something that you reset PRAM with normally. But with the OpenCore system, this is a lot easier way to do it. Hit spacebar, get to this screen, and go to reset NVRAM. Now I'm going to show you what I have to do to get into High Sierra. And Mojave would be the same way if I still had that on the system. I don't have it on the system anymore. I'm just going to go ahead and restart from down here. And while I restart, I'm going to be holding the Option key. It's an Option key if it's an Apple keyboard. I'm using a Windows keyboard right here, so it's the Alt key. Now this is the Apple boot picker. This is not OpenCore. This is pre-OpenCore. So by holding Option down, we prevented it from booting into OpenCore and instead brought up the Apple boot picker. This would be OpenCore. I can go into OpenCore here. This is High Sierra. So if I want to boot into High Sierra, I can pick that. And I can do the same thing that I showed you before of holding the Control key and picking a default. So if I wanted to make High Sierra the default, I could hold the Control key and pick High Sierra and boot into it. And then the next time it came up, it would just automatically boot into High Sierra. I started by going to the Apple support website and create a bootable installer for macOS. There's a terminal command, create install media, that you copy and paste into terminal, and it'll make a macOS bootable installer once you've downloaded the installation package. I was going to do it on my M1 MacBook Pro, but nothing I did would work on this machine. I could not make it work. I've done this before on Intel machines, didn't work on this one. So go back to the 051. Luckily I still have a working operating system disk I can boot this into, and so I just booted it up in Sequoia, went back to Apple support, tried again to create install media. Again, this didn't work well for me. I wasn't able to get it done. So what finally did work? Well, there's a utility on GitHub called Mist. Runs in macOS. It has a lot more capability on Intel Mac than it does on Apple Silicon Macs. So now that I was on the trusty old Mac Pro, I'm able to go to GitHub, get this program. It's short for macOS Installer Super Tool. You can buy the developers a cup of coffee. I will do that. It's a great application and I appreciate them. For an Intel Mac, you can do things like generate a disk image, generate a bootable installer, I missed what the next one was, but it does things that you can't do on the Apple Silicon Mac. So we'll go ahead and go to the latest revision of this software and pick the DMG file. I don't know what the difference is between the DMG and the PKG. I think they both work, but it downloads very quickly, and I'll go ahead and open it up here. Double click on the Mist icon and open it up. Am I sure I want to open a file downloaded from the internet? I guess I'm going to have to, or this whole thing isn't going to work, is it? So as it loads up, you see it's refreshing firmwares, and then it refreshes installers. And as I start scrolling down through here, I don't realize yet that I'm looking at firmwares, not installers. See these buttons up towards the top of this window? So I get down to the bottom and I can't find High Sierra. And I click this only show compatible versions button because I think that's going to help, and now I see that we're looking at firmwares now. Okay, now we're looking at installers. So I'll unclick that button so that I can see the unsupported installer that we're going to need here. scroll down to macOS High Sierra, and the two blue buttons, the one on the right is the one that creates bootable macOS installers. Okay, I have to agree here that I'm downloading this on a Mac that's not supported, which is fine since it's running OpenCore Legacy Patcher. It's not seen as a supported system for this OS. But once I push this blue button, it will download the installer and write it to the flash drive. The flash drive is over on the right of the screen, just under Mist. It's called My Volume. I set that up when I was trying to do the create install media. You do have to format it as macOS Extended Journaled. This one's already done that way. And now we have it started. So as we go through here, this is going to go through a lot of different steps. I'm just going to let it play through. I do have some of the longer steps cut short. So when you do it yourself, it'll take longer. It takes, I don't know, maybe 10 to 15 minutes total to run through this thing and create the installer. And I had the installer in a USB 2 port on my Mac Pro. Maybe it would go faster if I'd put it in a USB 3. I don't know, didn't try it. So we'll go ahead and let this continue working along, and I'll show the whole thing on the screen. And I will just kind of quiet down here a little bit so you can watch it and listen to a little bit of music. All right, it's coming up right on the end here, and it's just about done. So we'll go ahead and click the close button, and over on the right of the screen is install macOS High Sierra. There's our installer. So we're ready to go. Okay, so I have the Mac Pro ready to install High Sierra. I have the original Radeon HD 5770 GPU that came with the computer. This has a special Mac EFI, so it'll have pre-boot graphics as we start this up. Here's the USB installer to install High Sierra. I have a wired keyboard plugged in case I need to hold the Option key to get the boot picker, but I don't think I'll have to because it won't be able to find anything to boot from except this flash drive, so I think it'll do that automatically. I've taken all of the drives out of the computer and have actually erased 3 of them into macOS Extended Journaled, so it won't find anything to boot from on these drives. They're all wiped clean and ready to go. So I am going to install High Sierra and Sequoia on this drive. Probably upgrade the High Sierra to Mojave. But I'm going to put this in drive number 1 because I'm also going to put OpenCore on this drive. And the old wisdom from Martin Lowe OpenCore days was to always put your OpenCore drive in drive space number 1 because that's where the macOS looks first. And in case it loses its blessed startup disk, it'll look here in slot number 1. So I'm going to put that in there. By the way, I use either the Sabrent or Fenlink adapters, and these are really nice to use the Mac Pro because you can use the original drive trays. Put the 2.5-inch drive in there, and it puts the connectors right where it would be on a 3.5-inch drive. So when you plug them in, the connectors go right where they're supposed to in the backplane. It works just like a 3.5-inch drive. Sabrent and Fenlink make them. Of course, since we're using the original sleds, they look great when they're in the computer. But I'll go ahead and put this one in. And that is the drive that we'll put High Sierra onto. Put the flash drive into one of the USB ports on the Mac. And we'll go ahead and start the computer. And it takes a while to boot from these flash drives. We'll just let it go and not hold down any keys and see if it goes on its own. Okay, it's picking it up. Well, that took about 10 minutes, maybe longer than that. Should have timed it. It takes a while, but now here we are. I'm not feeling too adventurous today, so I'll go ahead and do this in English. I actually want to go to disk utility first. And I'm going to go in here to the view menu, show all devices. I'm going to pick my PNY disk, I'm going to erase it and format it as an APFS. APFS is Apple's newest file system. It's not really new now, it came out with High Sierra and on, but it's optimized for standard solid state disks, and it's, I think, required for more modern operating systems. So that's what I'm going to do, APFS. I'm going to call this High Sierra. And erase. If you're new to macOS from Windows or something, erase means the same thing as format. Okay, erase process is complete. Click Done to continue. Okay, now I'm done with disk utility, so I'll click this off. Now we'll install macOS. Again, carefully read the agreement and agree to it. Choose the disk I just named High Sierra, and the installation begins. So as High Sierra is installing, I'll explain a little bit about why I decided to start with High Sierra on this machine instead of just going directly to Mojave. Well, first of all, High Sierra supports the original GPUs that came with the Mac Pro. So it's simple that way. If it comes with this GPU, then I can use it and I can install and run High Sierra with that GPU, and I don't need to get another one. If I used an nVidia Kepler GPU, there's a bug in the USB installer that causes it not to recognize Kepler as being metal supported. Kepler is metal supported, but the workaround to the installer bug is to install High Sierra and then upgrade from High Sierra. And the final reason to install High Sierra first and then update to Mojave rather than just installing Mojave to start with is the boot ROM issue. If I just got this machine, I picked it up and I didn't know what boot ROM it had, then installing High Sierra would prompt me to update the boot ROM to the High Sierra boot ROM as part of the installation process. Mojave requires that you have the High Sierra boot ROM. So if I bought a computer that hadn't even been updated to High Sierra, then it wouldn't have the boot ROM that I need to install Mojave. But by installing High Sierra, it'll make sure that the boot ROM is ready for macOS Mojave to install. right, High Sierra is installed and running. Let's go to About This Mac and see what we have here. Mac Pro mid-2010, 3.46 gigahertz, 6-core Intel Xeon, 48 gigabytes of 1333 RAM. Graphics is the ATI Radeon HD 5770. Let's look at the system report. And here we can see the boot ROM. It is the 144.0.0.0, which is the latest and greatest boot ROM in the Mac Pro. And that concludes the High Sierra installation. Alright, let's install EnableGOP. This will allow us to use non-Mac flashed or non-Mac EFI graphics cards and still be able to get the pre-boot graphics, the boot screen and the boot picker that the original Apple cards allowed us to do. We're going to use Mac Sound Solutions Ultimate Mac Pro 5.1 One More Thing EnableGOP video. I recommend that you watch this video beginning to end. Lance McVicker put a lot of work into this and he did a great job explaining things. I'm not going to go into the depth that he did, so watch his video. I'm just going to run through the process here just for completeness of this video. Okay, scrolling down through his comments, he gives you 3 links to files that we need to download. So we'll start with link number 1, which is GitHub's OpenCore package from Acid Anthera. Go to the latest release and we'll download the zip file. So this is the entire OpenCore package. We only need a file or 2 out of here. Download McSchrober's ROM dump tool directly from his Dropbox. We'll open up the downloads folder in Finder. There it is. And finally, DOSDude's file for injecting EnableGOP into the ROM, dxeinject.zip. Find it right there, click on it, and it downloads. So we'll knock down the Chrome window. Right-click on the desktop, create a new folder. We'll call it EnableGOP. That'll give us a nice little folder to put the files we need when we're working through this process. Double-click on dxeinject.zip. That decompresses it. If you're new to macOS, that's just how you unzip a file. You double-click on it. You might have to right-click on it to get it to open if it gives you security problems. And then I had double-clicked on download McSchrober's CD-ROM dump tool and working through it. It's downloading it now. Okay. And there it is. So the little integrated circuit logo, that's the ROM dump file. Go ahead and double click on that. And let it work as it goes. Okay, the first thing we want to do is download our firmware. So we're going to go over to the backup firmware button and push that. Enter the password. And it runs through a number of different things as it's downloading and analyzing the firmware. Then we get this report, so let's take a look. At the very top it tells us where it saved the ROM dump, so we can go find that later. It gives us the firmware of the machine. It does say EnableGOP 1.4 EFI module identified, so I've already installed EnableGOP, so it says that here. And then down lower, Microsoft certificates 0. So if you put a EFI installation of Microsoft Windows on your computer, it can install certificates, but OpenCore protects from that. So you never want to put Windows EFI installation on your Mac unless you are running it through OpenCore. Luckily, I've had Windows on my machine for years, but I've always run it through OpenCore, so it's protected it, and I have no certificates. Down lower, 3823 bytes of free space, looks good. let's see, where's the, oh yeah, right here. 2 firmware boots since the last garbage collection, so that tells us, I guess, the garbage collection is working okay. So yeah, I think we're good to go here. All right, we'll go ahead and quit McSharber's ROM dump tool and go to the downloads folder where it made this folder and saved the ROM dump information. Open that up, find the bin file, and drag that over to the EnableGOP folder. Now back to the downloads folder. Double click on the OpenCore zip file. It'll decompress. Open that down. Go to Utilities, EnableGOP, and I want to scroll down here and get the EnableGOP 1.4 FFS file. Drag that over to the EnableGOP folder. And it's getting kind of messy, so let's view it as a list. Okay, there's a README under the EnableGOP folder, so I'm going to open that and of course read through that. Take the bin file here. I'm going to make a copy of it before I start changing names and things, so I'll just right click on it, copy, paste it back here, and it makes it a file of the same name with copy at the end. I'm just going to rename that to rom.bin, old rom.bin, excuse me. Open up a terminal window. Type bash, B-A-S-H. Enter. CD for change directory to desktop. CD, or I'm going to list what's in the desktop, ls. So you see EnableGOP is in the desktop. CD to EnableGOP. List. And you see the DXE inject is in there, EnableGOP, the original file, and then there's old rom.bin in there. I'm going to move the terminal window under the EnableGOP folder so I can see the file names a little better as I'm typing the commands in. I already have DXE inject typed here. I have a couple of misfires here. I'm looking at the README file and kind of following off it, but actually it was a lot more helpful following off of Lance's instructions. I did a couple things wrong with this go round. I didn't put a ./s in front of the DXE inject. I'm sorry, not ./x, just / in front of the DXE inject. And I'm also using the wrong name for EnableGOP. It's EnableGOP _ 1.4 FFS, not just EnableGOP.ffs. So I watched Lance's video again. All right, let's try this one more time and let's see if we can get it right. / DXE inject space old rom.bin space new rom.bin space EnableGOP _ 1.4.ffs, and look up at the EnableGOP folder up there. After I push enter, you should see a new rom.bin appear if it does its job. And there it is. So it worked. It's injected it's injected the EnableGOP into the ROM, and it's ready to flash. Next step is to restart the machine in firmware mode, so we'll just go ahead and shut it down. I'm just kidding. The next step is to disable SIP, System Integrity Protection. To do that, we have to start the computer and hold down Command R. Have to do that for a while, and that will allow us to, that'll boot into recovery mode and allow us to disable SIP. Okay, now we're up in recovery mode. We'll open a terminal window from the Utilities menu up top. Zoom in on that. So in recovery mode, in a terminal window, type CSRUTIL space disable. Successfully disabled system integrity protection. Please restart the machine for the changes to take effect. So here we restart. Actually, we need to shut the Mac down to boot into firmware mode. Press the power button in for about 20 seconds and hold it in there until the light just above the power button begins to flash. Alright, booted back up in macOS High Sierra. Came back up with all the windows open from the last time, so I knocked most of those down just to clean up the screen a little bit. I want to go to the Downloads folder. And close up McSchauber's ROM dump. And then again I have to choose to download the dumper from the Dropbox file, because that's the only way that I can run that. I tried other ways to run the McSchauber's tool and couldn't do it, so I had to do this again. And ROM dump app, open that up again. So back where we were before, except for this time, instead of backing up the firmware, we're going to flash it. So I'm just going to look through here and find my new ROM. And there it is, new rom.bin in desktop under EnableGOP. And I'm going to push the flash firmware button. I have to put my administrator password in. A warning here that you could brick the Mac Pro and it's at your own risk. And I have to find the file, so go to Desktop, EnableGOP, and pick new rom.bin. Choose. I was waiting here for the spinny thing to stop, but apparently it's not going to stop, so I finally just hit the choose button. And McSchauber's ROM dump is going to analyze the file, so that's kind of cool. It's going to make sure that there's nothing wrong with it before it flashes it to my Mac Pro. Because of course if there were something wrong with it, it might make my Mac Pro unbootable. So thank you McSchauber for doing this extra check. Now it saw that there's more than one instance of EnableGOP. So what happened was I started with a boot ROM that had EnableGOP, and then I injected EnableGOP again, which I shouldn't have done. But it was smart enough to find this situation and warn me not to do it. And of course here's the ROM dump again, and yeah, right there, more than one EnableGOP modules identified. So I am going to choose Not Now instead of Flash It on this screen and bail out of here and then quit. But of course if you were doing it and you didn't already have, you know, EnableGOP and got that warning, you would proceed ahead and go ahead and flash it. So this ends the part of installing EnableGOP. Except that we have to remember to re-enable SIP before we get into something else and forget about it. So again, we'll copy the same video in of booting into recovery mode, holding Command R during boot for about 20 seconds or so. Okay, booted back up into recovery mode. Go to the Utilities menu up top. Again, choose Terminal. We'll zoom in on this terminal window. We're going to double check the status of SIP by typing csrutil status with a space in between. And it shows us that yes, system integrity protection is still disabled. So we're going to re-enable it by typing csrutil enable. And successfully enabled, please restart the machine for the changes to take effect. So we will do that. Installation of macOS Mojave. Booted up into High Sierra again. Just going to go to Google on Chrome and search for install macOS Mojave. Actually find out it's easier to get to this from Google than it is from inside the Apple website. So click the View in the Mac App Store button. And open an App Store. And there it is. I can click the download button. If you have a hard time getting to this, and sometimes Apple kind of hides them and makes them difficult to get to, Mr. Macintosh has links that you can usually follow and get to these. So while it's loading, we'll take a look at some of the upgrades that Mojave has on here. Finder, Continuity Cap, Camera, Mac App Store, iTunes, Safari, Apple News, Stocks, Voice Memos, and Home. Nothing in there that I'm really too interested in, honestly. What's new in version 10.14.6, which was the last version of macOS Mojave. Go ahead and minimize that while it's still downloading. Let's open Disk Utility. What I decided to do, rather than replace High Sierra or update High Sierra, I'm going to add a volume to the container. And I'm going to title it Mojave. So what this will let me do is it'll give me a volume that I can install Mojave onto and keep High Sierra and Mojave. This is an option you have on this volume to give it a reserve size or a quota size. I'm just going to leave those two spaces blank, and it'll grow as it needs to within the volume of the entire disk. So there, I have a Mojave volume that I can install Mojave to. Back to the download. It's about halfway. And this is as far as we can go without a metal-supported GPU. So right here, there's nothing to do but quit, shut the machine down, put a metal-supported GPU in, and restart. All right, let's change out the GPU. So since we're going to Mojave, we need a metal-supported GPU. What is a metal-supported GPU? Well, it's one that Apple decided to support with their Metal API. So they don't support the original Mac Pro GPUs, so you have to go to something like an AMD Polaris or something like that. So let's go ahead and open up the Mac. So this HD 5770 has pre-boot graphics. It has a special Mac EFI. And the card that we're going to put in here does not. Since we put EnableGOP on, we will be able to see the boot screen. And if we hold the Option key down during boot, we will be able to see the boot picker because of the EnableGOP. And because of that, we don't need a special graphics card that's Mac flashed. I do want to make a point of clarification, because when people talk about Mac flashed graphics cards, there are two things that they could mean. One is the pre-boot graphics in the special Mac EFI. The other is the Radeon 6000 series, the Navi 2 cards. If you put a Navi 2 card, an RX 6600 or 6800 in here, the machine won't boot. And so there's a fix by Syncretic, a good friend of the Mac Pro community, who made a fix that you can put into the UEFI of that GPU to make it work with a Mac Pro. And then you flash that to the card and it works. So that you still need to do if you want to use an RX 6600 or 6800. The problem with those cards, the Navi and the Navi 2 cards, is they're not supported by macOS Sequoia. The GPU drivers in, I believe it's Big Sur and above, and maybe Ventura and above, depend on AVX instructions. The processor under this big cooler here does not support AVX instructions, so the drivers that are in the later versions of macOS don't work at all with the Mac Pro. So OpenCore Legacy Patcher patches graphics drivers for Vega and Polaris generations. They also patch in drivers that are not supported by Sequoia at all, like nVidia Kepler, and I think even the old drivers for this old ATI card are patched in by the OpenCore Legacy Patcher process. So this will actually work in Sequoia, but it's not metal supported, and so the experience is not good. And by the way, this is only a 1 GB card. I tried, running it in Sequoia a little bit and trying things, and you keep running into limitations. It's not worth trying to use. High Sierra, it's probably okay, but beyond that, it's not a usable card. So I'm going to take this out. I'm going to put this card in. This is a Radeon Pro WX 5100. It is a Polaris architecture card. It's supported from High Sierra all the way through Sequoia with OpenCore Legacy Patcher. Also, of course, runs in Windows and Linux. Practically everything does. It is a single slot card. It supports 16 lanes, but I'm going to put it in a 4-lane slot because it's not a really high performance card, so I don't need those lanes. The reason I want to use this card, though, is it does support hardware acceleration for video encoding and decoding all the way from Mojave to Sequoia. And I found out in my video that I put out on the Vega GPU that the Vegas are not supported with hardware acceleration in Sequoia. But this one is. So what that means is if you're watching videos, high resolution videos or something like that, or if you're doing video editing where you're encoding and decoding video a lot, this will work for that with H.264 and H.265 videos. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and take out the old card, put this in, and then this will allow us to proceed with Mojave. So to take any PCIe card out of here in the Mac Pro, you first have to unscrew this little bracket that holds the cards down. So 2 finger screws on there. You might have to use a Phillips screwdriver to loosen it if it's in there really tight. To remember to disconnect display cables before we take the card out. We'll remove the power to the card from the back plane. This fan shroud moves this rod here that holds the card in, so you have to push a button on the fan shroud and move it back to release the GPU and any other cards in there. Now we can pull that out. Now, sneak peek into the future here, I do plan to put this Quadro RTX 4000 in the machine to use with Windows and Linux. It's not supported at all by macOS, but it's a much higher performing card to use on gaming and if I were doing work on this machine, work. We'll talk about this a little bit when we get into Windows and such, but to save room for this is a 16-lane card as well. I'm going to put it in the bottom slot, which is a 16-lane slot. I'm going to keep this slot open for maybe a high-performance NVMe card. Not in the plans for this video, but maybe in the future. So I'm going to put this in slot number 3. And everybody's going to yell, you can't put in a GPU in slot number 3. Yeah, you can. Watch us. We'll do it. Make sure that's back. Snapped right in there. Go ahead and put the bracket back in. Push this back in place. Now we're ready to proceed with Mojave. All right, we're booted back up into macOS High Sierra. Enter the password. And then it's going to open up the windows that were open when I last shut it down, including the App Store here. So we'll go ahead and get rid of this window. See there, it wants me to install macOS Sequoia, which does not work on this machine. Go to the Finder and open up the Applications folder. And there we find Install macOS Mojave. Double click on that. And when it comes up, we're going to read the agreement and agree to the agreement and all that. By the way, we can continue now because we have a metal supported GPU agreement. And then it's going to let me pick the High Sierra disk, or I can show all disks, and there's the Mojave volume that we set up. I'm going to install it on Mojave, which will keep the High Sierra, as well as macOS Mojave, and then I'll be able to boot into whichever I want. Okay, so while it's continuing with the macOS Mojave installation, we'll go ahead and do the About This Mac and look and see that the graphics card, the Radeon Pro WX 5100, 8 gigabytes, is there and recognized properly. And from here on, it's a typical macOS installation. I'll just be quiet, let you hear some music, and watch it through. Enjoy. All right, I'm booted into Mojave, and I'm using Chrome because this would not work on Safari. Mojave's Safari is too old, and I'm opening up the OpenCore Legacy Patcher Release Apps link from the Creating macOS Installers instruction and pull that out as a separate window. Tap the latest button here, which is 2.4.1, and scroll all the way to the bottom to the Assets. And I want to download the OpenCore patcher.pkg file. So that takes about 25 seconds to download. It's pretty quick. Here it is in the downloads. Open that up. And this will install the application on your system. It doesn't create OpenCore. It just installs the application that we can use to create OpenCore. We'll go ahead and install it. Password. Yay, successful installation. I'll go ahead and move the installer to the trash. And now open Finder and Applications and find OpenCore Legacy Patcher. OpenCore Patcher, it's called. So double click that and get it started. And push the Create macOS Installer button. I will download a macOS installer since I don't already have one. And here it gives me all of these choices. I want to download Sequoia, so I pick that. It gives me a warning. I'm going to download it anyways. Okay, now it's finished downloading. It's extracting. And it successfully extracted. Would I like to continue and create a macOS installer? Yes, I believe I would. Okay, select the installer. So I'll select my flash drive, my Cruiser Glide 32 gigabyte flash drive. Are you sure it will erase everything? Yes, I'm sure. Now it'll create the installer. Now it's validating the installer's integrity. And it successfully created the installer. Would I like to continue to install OpenCore to this disk? That's to install OpenCore to the installer. And now I'm reopening the OpenCore Patcher app, build and install OpenCore, and I'm going to install it to disk. The 240 gigabyte SSD is where I'm putting the macOS, and that's where I want the OpenCore to be when it's all done. So I'll pick that disk, and I'll pick the EFI partition on that disk is where I want to put it. And it's pretty quick. Now it's ready to reboot. So when it reboots, I need to hold the Option key. That'll bring up the Apple boot picker and pick this EFI boot. I could pick either of the EFI boots. I'll pick this one. And I held Control so that it would make that the default. Now I'm in the OpenCore boot picker, and I just use the arrow keys to get over to install macOS Sequoia. Push Enter, and the Sequoia installation begins. Now at this point you have to be connected, your mouse or your keyboard need to be connected through a USB 2.0 hub. Because of some driver that's no longer in Sequoia, it won't recognize your mouse. Really, you only need a mouse at this point, so have your mouse connected through a USB 2.0 hub. So now I'm in the installer. I'm going to open the disk utility, pick the Intel 150 gigabyte disk that I want to use. I'm going to push this plus down here to add a partition. You can either add another volume or a partition. I'm going to add a partition, and I'm going to do that because Sequoia is much newer and different than the legacy operating systems, and supposedly it'll work better in a separate partition. Of course, I'll name the partition Sequoia. And I'll apply. So it's finished, and that was using disk utility to create a new partition to install Sequoia onto. So now to install macOS Sequoia. Continue. Carefully read and agree to the license. And now here I'll pick the Sequoia partition that we just created and continue. Takes a long time to install Sequoia. It restarts a few times. You just let it go. Go find something else to do for a while. Now that's finished and it comes up. So choose your country. I'll set this one up as new. It could transfer from another Mac, but I'll set this one up as a new one. Preferred language and keyboard is all good. Go with the defaults and set up the Mac account. What to use for an emoji? I think I like the shark. All right, now it's finished setting up the account. I can sign up into my Apple account, but I'll just skip for later. And another opportunity to read the agreement. I'll go ahead and enable location services. That's handy sometimes. I don't worry too much about hiding information from Apple because I figure they already know everything they want to anyway. Welcome to Mac, and so here we are running Sequoia, natively installed on a 5.1 Mac Pro from 2010 that is not supposed to be supported by Apple. Yeah, this is funny. This is an Apple aluminum USB keyboard, and it gives me this stuff about not being able to recognize the keyboard. But then if I just ignore it, everything works fine. And here's what we have, 3.46, that's my X5690. Opening up system settings. Okay, so for software update, it's highly recommended to turn off the automatic updates. So we'll go in software update and down here and hit the info button, and we'll click off down. I'll have to do the password, of course. Click off download new updates when available and install macOS updates. Click both of those off and then click done. And then I'll go ahead and download the Sequoia update. Now this will also let you download the Tahoe update, but don't do that. Tahoe is not supported by OpenCore Legacy Patcher, and it will not work on the system. So OpenCore Legacy Patcher has detected that we're updating, and so it chooses to download a KDK software to have on hand for when the new system comes up. So we'll let it do that. Sequoia installation is complete. We want to install Windows 11 on the Mac. In order to install Windows 11, we have to be able to create a USB installer. And in order to create a USB installer, we need access to Windows 11. So if you have a computer with Windows 11, have access to a computer, have a friend that'll let you use their computer or something, you can just go to the Windows Media Creation and make an installer. But let's assume we don't have a Windows computer handy and we want to make a USB installer. So one way to do that is to install the 14-day trial version of Parallels. And honestly, after going through this Parallels installation, you might like Parallels enough to want to keep it, to actually pay the fee and keep Parallels after the trial version. I was very impressed with how well this setup works and how easy it is to download Windows and how well it seems to work, you know, after it's installed. I haven't done a lot with it as a virtual machine. But let me explain what we're doing here. So what Parallels is going to do is going to create Windows as a virtual machine. So that means you're booted into macOS Sequoia. So the machine is running that operating system already, and you're creating a virtual machine. You would call Sequoia the host operating system, and then Windows would be the guest operating system in this virtual machine setup. And that is a valid way to run Windows on a Mac. Windows 11, probably mentioned elsewhere in the video, but it requires secure boot, TPM, and processor generations that the Mac Pro 5.1 can't meet. But Parallels doesn't care about that. It creates a virtual machine that meets all those requirements for Windows, so Windows 11 installs. And Parallels gives you some nice ways to run Windows and Mac side by side. You could be running a Mac app and then go to a Windows app and then back to the Mac app again. Go see another video on Parallels if you're interested in it. In this video, what we're specifically doing is we're installing Windows in a virtual machine so that we can make a USB installer, so that we can go back to OpenCore, use the OpenCore boot picker to choose the Windows installer, and install Windows directly on the system. The reason we want to do the direct installation, of course, is because When you use a virtual machine, you're dividing up the resources of the system between the guest and the host operating system. So some of the processor cores are used for the host operating system, some are used for the guest operating system, some of the RAM is used for the host, some is used for the guest. So when you're running an app on the guest operating system, you're not getting the full capability of the machine. Mac Pro 5.1, we want the full capability of the machine. We want to play some games and do some demanding applications on here, and we want the machine to give us its best performance. So we're going to install it directly using OpenCore. But as you see here, as we're going through the setup for Parallels, it just takes you right to the download and install Windows 11. You don't even have to leave Parallels to do it. You don't have to go to the Windows site or anything. You just go through the step-by-step process here on Parallels, and we download and install Windows. Okay, it's completed validating, and now the Windows 11 is starting. Okay, now we have Windows installed in a virtual machine. we're going to go ahead and download Windows 11 ISO so we can make a flash drive to install it on a real machine or on a real disk. So we'll navigate to the Download Windows 11 site on Microsoft.com. And we'll skip over the Windows 11 Installation Assistant and just go ahead and scroll down here to the Download Windows 11 Disk Image ISO for x64 devices. Pull the pull-down menu. There's only one choice, the Windows 11 Multi-ISO for x64 devices, so we'll pick that. After it validates, which just takes a minute, select the product language. So I'll choose English United States and confirm that. Validates. And then finally, click the Download Windows 11 English 64-bit download button, and that will start the download. It takes a few minutes to download the Windows ISO. Okay, as we wrap up the download, we'll go to GitHub Rufus. Rufus is the tool we're going to use to make the bootable installer to install Windows 11 on our system. Go ahead and scroll down here. Rufus is the reliable USB formatting utility, and among other great things Rufus does for us is it creates Windows 11 installation drives for PCs that don't have TPM or secure boot. So our Mac Pros don't meet the requirements for Windows 11, but Rufus kind of blocks that out during the installation process so that it will install anyway. The release is over here on the right side, Rufus 4.13, so we'll click on that. And then download the Rufus 4.13.exe file. When you do this, it may be a later version of this, but today it's 4.13. Here I'm going to plug the USB drive into the Mac that I'm going to use as an installer. And go ahead and open the Rufus file, allow it to run. And even though I have the drive plugged in, I can't see it, and that's because I'm using a virtual machine and I haven't told the host operating system that it's okay to let the virtual machine access that drive yet. So I have to go up to the top menu here, which is actually Parallels, and pick Devices, USB, and then pick on the drive that I put in, which is this drive with all the letters, and then allow Parallels to access that drive, and that'll allow me to write to it. Go ahead and open up Windows Explorer, and you see over on the right that that drive is showing up now. Now we can go back to Rufus. The device is showing up there in the first box. I have to select the ISO, so I'll go to Downloads and select the Windows 11 ISO that we downloaded. Standard Windows installation, GPT and UEFI is what we want. And time to hit the start button. I do want to remove the requirement for 4 gigabytes of RAM, secure boot, and TPM, and I do want to remove the requirement for an online Microsoft account. And I'll go ahead and create an account with username Douglas Edward. The rest of the options I'm not too interested in. Okay. Okay. And off we go. Okay, so at this point I'm done with the virtual machine. So I'll go ahead and quit Windows 11, which is the virtual machine we're running in Parallels. It takes us back to the macOS Sequoia desktop, and I'm going to restart the computer. Quit Parallels first, and then restart the Mac. Now as the system reboots, OpenCore will come up first, and we'll see the OpenCore boot picker, and there on the right is the UEFI NTFS. That's our Windows installer that we just made, the USB installer. So I'm going to boot on that, and that's going to start the Windows installation process. Okay, language, time and currency format, all good on the defaults. Keyboard, good. I would like to install Windows 11. Nice to know I can use this installer to repair my PC if I need to in the future. I agree that everything on the drive will be deleted. I don't have a product key right now. I'll get one of those cheap product keys later so that my Windows will be activated, but we can just skip that for now. I'm going to choose Windows 11 Pro. I've just always used the Pro version of Windows 11. Don't really know why. Another long agreement to carefully read and decide whether we want to agree with it or not run the software. So I will accept. So this is the important part. It's found the disks on the system. You don't want any extra disks. You don't want any more disks than you need on the system. Disk 0 is my Apple macOS disk, and I have OpenCore on that, so I need that installed. Disk 2 is the USB installer, so disk 1 is the target disk that I want to install Windows on. I can double check it because it has a 465 gigabyte partition on it, and I know that it's the only drive with enough capacity to have 465 gigabytes. So I know disk 1 is the correct one. So I'm going to delete all of the partitions on that disk so that it's all unallocated space. But only after I'm sure that that's the disk I really want to delete the partitions on. So I'll click a partition, delete it, click the remaining partition, delete it. And now disk 1 is showing as all unallocated space. Unallocated space, I can say that. So I'm ready to install. Windows 11 Pro will keep nothing, and off we go. Now some people have said that you have to babysit it while it's going through because these boot pickers come up as it's reinstalling, and it may not come up with Windows as the default boot device when the Windows boot picker comes up. In my case, it does show Windows as the default boot picker, so I just let it go, hands off, and it went ahead and installed. It did restart a couple of times, but I didn't have to actually manually change the boot picker. And there's my Douglas Edward account that Rufus said it would create for me. And there we are, installed in Windows. Let's get started with the Windows 11 drivers. Start by searching for Settings. We'll open this and we'll use Settings to get to Windows Update, and that'll load most of the drivers. I had to plug in an Ethernet cable because when I first installed Windows, it didn't even have a driver for the wireless or Bluetooth module. So I had to plug an Ethernet in just so I could get to Windows Update so that I could load these drivers. That's why you see that error there. That was from when I didn't have a network connected at all. So now it's checking for updates. And when it's done and comes up, we have all these security intelligence updates and malicious software removal tools. The bottom two are the AMD and the Broadcom-net. The Broadcom.net is already completed, so that's our Wi-Fi. So we'll go ahead and look at network and internet and make sure that the Wi-Fi is working. Shows that it's on. And we'll tap Show Available Networks. Yep, there they are. SOX is our home network, so I'll connect to that. 3 down below that is my LG oven. I don't know why my oven has a Wi-Fi network, but there it is. If you know why my LG oven has a wireless network, tell me in the comments. And it'll go ahead and connect, and then we'll be on Wi-Fi and everything's fine. And at this point I can disconnect the Ethernet and put my computer upstairs where it normally is, away from the router. Back to Windows Update. Still loading things in. You will not get drivers for the Realtek audio codec, that's the chip that does the sound, Bluetooth, or the Apple USB SuperDrive if you happen to use that. So I'm going to show you how to use the Boot Camp software update to get those drivers. So we'll first go to Wikipedia. It has a great article on Boot Camp. Just search for that in Microsoft Edge. And scroll down past the AI stuff to the Wikipedia article. Scroll down through this. Talks about all the different versions of boot camps, and scroll down past that till you get to Boot Camp Support Software for Windows Version History. And this tells you the supported systems for each version of Boot Camp Support Software. Here's the Mac Pro 2010, which is what I have. So this 5.1.5621 is going to have the drivers that my system needs. From 2014, but that's okay. The hardware is old, so why wouldn't the drivers be old? Now I'm going to go to Google, and I'm going to search for Apple Support Boot Camp Software, and then paste the 5.1.5621, and there it is. It was the first result. And so this is Apple's website where I download the support software. So we'll download the Boot Camp Support Software, and it downloads as a zip file, a zip folder, I guess you call that. And so we'll open up the download folder. Wait for it to download. I'm impatient, so I just aimlessly move the window a little bit. So something to do while it's downloading. Not sure what I'm looking for there, but just moving the window around. And there it is downloaded. Okay, so I've opened Device Manager. We'll keep that there for a minute. Go to Downloads, Boot Camp, and I'm going to extract all. Just go ahead and extract it right there in the Downloads folder. You can put it somewhere else if you want to keep it there permanent, but I'll work with it in the Download folder. It takes a minute or two to completely extract. And when it's finished extracting, we'll first install the Bluetooth driver. I'm going to right-click on Bluetooth USB host controller, the Update Driver button there in Device Manager, browse for drivers on my computer, and just navigate over here to the Boot Camp folder, that Apple Bluetooth Broadcom 64 file, and it'll install the driver. So when that's done, move that out of the way. OK on this one, close that, OK, close on this one. And there's the Bluetooth module with the drivers installed. Next, I'm going to check for sound. You see there's nothing here called Realtek Audio. What you see here is all digital audio, no digital to analog or analog to digital. And that's what we're missing by not having the Realtek Audio drivers. So we'll go to the Downloads folder, open up that Boot Camp folder, go to the Boot Camp folder under that, open up the drivers, Realtek, Realtek Setup, and allow it. And it wants to restart the computer, so I'll go ahead and restart the computer. Finish, and the computer will restart. Okay, we're back up after the restart. Go back to the sound settings. In first and second line, you see Realtek Digital Output, Realtek High Definition Audio. So we have the audio drivers for the Mac Pro now. Last one, if you happen to use the USB optical drive, the Apple Super Drive, the silver aluminum one, there is a driver in here for that so that you can use that with Windows. I like it, so I use it. So it's under Apple and the Apple ODD Installer 64. Double click on that, yes, and it will install the driver needed for the Apple Super Drive USB. And with that, Windows 11 drivers are installed. Now that Windows is installed, let's go ahead and put the Quadro RTX 4000 in here. First of all, I think I've proven the point that the graphics card works okay in slot 3. So I'll remove this bracket. Once it's pulled out, I'll pull out the WX5100 and drop it into slot number 2. Slot number 1 and slot number 2 are the 16 lane slots. And even though this isn't a real powerful graphics card, it's still a 16 lane card. So it might be bottlenecked a little bit by being in a 4-lane slot. So I'll go ahead and move it down to the 16 lane slot. And before I put the card in, it's always easier to put the cables into the backplane first. So this is a dual mini 6-pin by 8-pin connector. The RTX 4000 has an 8-pin connector, so this is the proper way to do this. This distributes the load among the 2 mini 6-pin connectors. Keeps it from overdrawing one of them. And then into the end of the card, and of course it's easier to put this cable in before you put the card in. It's hard to reach around there and do things. Not so bad with this card because it's only a single slot card, but if you get the beefier ones in there, it's a little easier to put this cable in first. So we'll snap that in, put the little hold down back. This isn't a terrible design because you can do it without tools, but what I've had in Adele is a little better. And then move this little frown shroud and it locks the cards in place. Let's install the nVidia driver. So we'll open a browser, search for nVidia app, download it. When it's downloaded, we'll open it up and install it. The nVidia app will install the latest driver. We're going to be installing the 595 driver, which is brand spanking new. And once installed, the nVidia app can be used for all kinds of graphics settings and game launching and everything else. So it's a pretty nice app to have. And now that the NVIDIA app is installed, you can see that it's installed the 595.97 graphics driver, the HD audio driver, and the USB-C driver, because this card, this RTX 4000, has a high-speed USB port. Here you can read about DLSS 4.5, which is one of the exciting new features. NVIDIA driver installation is complete. We're going to use a utility called Ventoy from GitHub to put multiple Linux ISOs onto a single USB flash drive. That way I can install multiple Linux ISOs and not have to get flash drive after flash drive. This is a pretty cool utility. Thanks to the people that made this. So we'll download it from GitHub. And here I'll grab Linux Cinnamon ISO from Linux Mint, and it'll go ahead and download that. While it's doing that, I'll go find another one. Pop! OS. And go ahead and download it. You're in control. I like that. Download. And we can choose Pop! OS LTS, LTS with NVIDIA. And since I have an NVIDIA GPU, I'm going to use the Pop! OS with NVIDIA Fedora Linux. And we'll go ahead and choose the Fedora Workstation version of it and download that. We won't need this Fedora Media Writer because we're using Ventoy. So we'll go ahead and download this one too. So we have 3 versions of Linux being downloaded right now, and we'll put them all 3 on the Ventoy drive. So we'll just open up Downloads. Everything is still downloading. In the meantime, we'll go ahead and open the Ventoy folder, extract all, extract it here, double click that, double click that. We'll double click the Ventoy 2-disk application file. Yes, I want it to run. Now I've used this before and also already made one, which is the reason it has something in the right there, but I'm just going to go ahead and overwrite it, just wipe the whole thing out and do it again. Data will be lost. It's going to wipe out my flash drive, and I agree to that. So I tried to write YES in lowercase, and it didn't like that at all. So I have to try it again. YES in uppercase. That's what we need. Yes, the data will be lost. I agree. Double checking, making sure that it is indeed the right drive that I'm going to wipe out here. Congratulations, Ventoy has been successfully installed to the device. Yay us. Okay, so we're done with this. Okay, PopOS is done downloading. The other two are still going, but I'll go ahead and open Ventoy and we'll put PopOS on the flash drive. Downloads. Just simply drag and drop PopOS from downloads into Ventoy. That's all you have to do. All right, now Mint is finished, so we'll copy it over. Okay, now we have all three ISO files on the Ventoy flash drive. So I'm going to shut the machine down. I'm going to remove all the unnecessary drives. I'm going to keep my macOS drive in there because it has OpenCore on it. But I'll take everything else out except for the flash drive, the OpenCore drive, and the drive that we're going to install Linux onto. All right, I'm booting, holding the Option key down, so we'll get the Apple boot picker. And I'll skip over the EFI boot that has the OpenCore symbol and choose the one that has the USB symbol. That'll get me the flash drive. Here's the Ventoy boot picker. So you see I have 6 ISOs for different Linux distributions. I'm going to install Endeavour, but I also have Mint, Manjaro, Pop, Ubuntu, and Zorin. I'm going to install EndeavourOS with the nVidia driver since I do want to use my Turing nVidia GPU. This EFI warning that you see in the upper left, every Linux distro does that, and it doesn't seem to hurt anything. Endeavour, of course, boots with a lot of text. Welcome to your Endeavour. Now this is the only distribution that recognized my Broadcom card and prompted me to install the drivers. As the installer comes up, I'll select Partition Manager gparted so that I can delete the existing partitions and install Endeavour. I do have a wired Ethernet, and when you install these Linux distributions, none of them will come with the Broadcom drivers to support the Wi-Fi in the Mac Pros. So you do need either an Ethernet or a tethered phone or something to have Ethernet, but since this one prompts me to install the Broadcom drivers, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And there it is. It's connected. All right, so to install the new OS, first of all, I'm going to make sure I'm on the right disk, which is SDB. That's the 480 gigabyte disk I'm putting installations on. I'm going to delete the existing partitions by selecting each partition on the drive, doing the trash can, and in gparted, nothing happens until you click the check mark, Apply Operations. If you don't do that, it doesn't actually do it. Check details here. I can see that it did what I thought it did. And so now the entire 480 gigabyte disk is unallocated. So now we're ready to start the installer. Choose the online method. It'll start Calamares, which is the installer. Now the typical things, you choose your country, your time zone, your keyboard, And this is interesting. These are all the desktop environments you can choose from. No desktop, Plasma, GNOME, XFCE4, Cinnamon, Mate, Budgie, LXQT, LDD, whatever. I'm choosing Plasma KDE, but you could choose any of these desktop environments. Lots to choose from on Endeavor. I'm going to go ahead and enable all these packages. Might need them for some. Systemd boot tends to work really well with the OpenCore boot picker, so I'm going to keep Systemd boot as the bootloader. Going to make sure I have the right drive selected first, the Kingston 480 gigabyte. And since this is the first of the Linux installs, I'll just go ahead and do a erase disk installation. No reason not to yet. And it'll just use the whole disk to install it, but we can shrink the partition later and add some more partitions for other OSs. So it shows what the disk will look like. I'll go ahead and click the next button. Put my login and password information in. It says it wants a longer password, but it accepts a 4-digit password. Double check everything again. Make sure I'm putting it on the right disk. I am. And install. And ask you, do you really mean it? Yes, you do. And we'll go ahead and wait for it to install. It's all done now, so we can restart the system and boot into our newly installed Endeavor installation. Again, I'm holding Option, doing an Option boot. Again, doing the EFI boot. And this time I'm going to install Pop! OS. So I did choose the Pop! OS with the nVidia drivers. We'll boot it in the normal mode. And I was not able to install Pop! OS with the nVidia card in the machine. I had to take the nVidia card out, install it with AMD card, but once it was installed, I was able to use the nVidia card just fine. But installation did not work with the nVidia card in. I got black screens after boots. Anyway, same kinds of choices you get with every install. Now we go to the option of clean install, the refresh install, or custom. The refresh install is nice to know about. If we have problems in the future, we can put the ISO back in and do this refresh install, and in other words, reinstall it and keep our files and such. I'm going to use custom because I want to add this to the same disk that we already have Endeavor on. And so I'm going to have to create some partitions here, or at least create one more partition. But in order to create a partition, I'm going to have to shrink the partition that Endeavor's on. So I'll click the Modify Partitions button. That brings up our good friend gparted, and make sure I have the right disk selected, which is SDB. And I need to shrink this Endeavor partition from 393 so that I have room. I want to shrink it to actually make room for 3 partitions. I want Endeavor, Pop, and a third. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce the size of this partition to 131, 133. That'll leave 271, 705 free space following. Click the Resize Move button. And nothing happens until you click the check mark up top and apply. So now it's done shrinking. Check the details, just make sure I understand it did what I wanted to, and it did. And as it refreshes, there's the Endeavor that has been resized to 128 gigabytes. And now I'm going to create a new partition. This will be the Pop! OS partition. And I'll make it 131, 133 megabytes. And I'll name it Pop! OS. Find it's very useful to name the partitions because when you're in gparted or something like that, it's good to know which partition is which, because otherwise they all look the same. All right, and you know the drill. We have to click the check mark and apply before it does anything. All right, we'll close that. So we have our partition now for Pop! OS. So we're ready to go back to the installer. And it refreshes and brings up the new partition. So I'll click the partition, I'll use it as the root, and the file system. I don't have to reformat it. I could reformat it, but I don't have to. Now I'm going to choose the same partition for EFI as the other OS used, and I'm not going to reformat the EFI partition because Endeavor also counts on that EFI partition, so I can't format it. Put your new username and password information in, set up your user account. And let it go ahead and install. And we'll have to restart it. Now this EFI boot that's not the OpenCore, but it looks like a magnetic 3.5-inch hard drive, that's the boot loader for PopOS. And turn off the screen reader because I think it's kind of annoying. And next. So it gives me this Wi-Fi, and you see Wi-Fi is turned on, but there are no networks. We'll install the Wi-Fi driver later. So as always, choose your time zone, choose your nearest city. I'll stick with the dark appearance. I prefer all my controls on the bottom of the screen. I tried the top and bottom, couldn't get used to it. Information about snapping and shortcuts, how to use the super key. And this is it. This is PopOS. We're in it. Go ahead and open the store. And the first thing I'll do is load the updates. While it's checking for updates, I'll work on this Wi-Fi a little bit. So you see there are no networks here. Even though the Wi-Fi is switched on, there are no networks listed. Let's look at the applications that come pre-installed with PopOS. It's pretty ready to go. It has the entire LibreOffice suite and Thunderbird Mail, some image viewers and document viewers. It has these utilities, has the nVidia X server since we have the nVidia driver package installed, and then the utilities that come with it. Okay, it's selected all the packages, and I click the Update All button, and it's ready to update. This is going to update application software, and it's also going to update system packages, which is all of the operating system. It takes a while to do that, but it's done that now. So let's work on this Wi-Fi driver issue. So I'm going to go into Google AI mode. I've searched for PopOS install or identify Wi-Fi and install driver. And so it's going to give me some commands, and I'm simply copying them out of Google and pasting them into terminal. And there it's identified my Wi-Fi chip as BCM4630. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell Google what it has by simply copying that output and pasting it right into the Google window. And then Google's AI will see that, and it'll say, okay, your Wi-Fi adapter is the BCM4360. This is the driver you need. And to install it, start with sudo apt update. So I just copy it, paste it in there. I need to put my password in since it's a sudo command, super user do command. So now all the packages are up to date. Need to install the driver. So copy and paste that command. And if you want to know what these commands are, you can ask the AI to explain the command to you, and it'll explain all the switches and options on the command. You do have to type a yes or a Y for yes to continue and install the driver. And then we'll run this sudo modprobe WL to load the driver module. It takes a reboot before it actually works, and somehow I lost the recording of it working. Trust me, it worked. Anyway, this is an example of how you use AI to figure out how to install things. Again, you can't see the Wi-Fi now because it needs a restart first, but after the restart, it works. So that's Pop. So we have Endeavor and PopOS on the system. And I went on to install Fedora as well, but I didn't video it. I'm not going to put it on this video because it's really much the same, but it works well also.